Hey there, friends. Welcome back to another Legally Armed America video. This is the final part 3 of my 3-part series with Ashton Forbes regarding Malaysian airliner MH370 that disappeared back in 2014. A lot of information regarding that. I don't know if I can bring you totally up to speed for the beginning of part 3 if you've missed part 1 and part 2, but I will say this. At this point, we've established weird stuff is going on. So we've got, according to Ashton, not me. Again, I'm kind of a moderator here, trying to get information out, and you'll see that I'll ask a lot of questions. But according to Ashton Forbes, this was a flight that was doomed from the jump because his claim is, again, his claim is that the flight had a bunch of lithium-ion batteries in the front cargo hold that was right next to all the computer electronics of the airliner itself, and that it was destined likely to go down as a result of that. Whether on purpose or accidental, he's saying that's why it went down. Now, I still have some question marks as to what he's implying, which it seems to be he thinks it might have been put on fire on purpose. Again, that's kind of what I've asked the question a couple times, so I think that's what I pulled out of that. But also that there were 20 semiconductor engineers on there from China and Malaysia that worked for a United States company. And this flight was supposed to be going to Beijing, China. Obviously, it never made it there. There is some theory, according to Ashton, that these were either black-hatted, the Chinese black hat guys, bad guys, were going to grab these guys, and maybe the United States kind of knew that. Again, intelligence kind of figures out other intelligence. So maybe we kind of presumed that that was going to happen, or we just didn't want them there. But nevertheless, they belonged to an American company, and they were going to China. So weird stuff there already. That's, to me, is a red flag. I hope you guys will bear with me on some of my questions, because I do try to give my guests the floor as much as I can to allow them to speak, but sometimes I feel like if my point or my question is not made, I need to reel them back in just to try to get control of the interview and make sure that we're heading in a direction that's actually answering some questions. I do my best to try to not have an interview just go off on the rails sometimes. So if I'm trying to reel it back in, sometimes it's just because I don't understand what's going on. I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I am one of the more curious guys in the room. Hope you guys enjoy it. This is part 3 of a 3-part series. If you missed the other 2, check them out. Very interesting. Make sure you have a little bit of time, cup of coffee, cold beer, or a warm, a room temperature, I should say, bourbon with you, and a nice cigar, because it may take a little while. There's some long interviews here. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoy it.
And some people say, well, you could teleport the plane. If you have this kind of technology, you might have inertia reduction, so that you could literally just teleport the plane and have it sit somewhere. Now, I don't really agree. I think this plane's being teleported somewhere else in the sky, still moving. But the other thing is this, there's a lot of different angles to this. So one of the other theories that's been out there was this idea that you can remote control the plane, and this idea that the United States remote controlled the plane to Diego Garcia. And this is the part where I say, guys, if I had a simpler explanation like that for you, I would just say it. It would be so much easier to sell to people than saying that we've got some crazy technology, but that's just not the case. Now, but maybe they did use this. Like, I'm not saying that if we can teleport a plane, we can surely remote control it. Right. It's not a stretch at that point. Right. So maybe we remote controlled it. Maybe we remote controlled it and landed it, and then maybe we took it back off again and it flew off again. I don't know. Maybe there's some kind of airbase somewhere on one of those islands in the Maldives that we've got access to.
So how do we account for that gap in time from when the locals saw potentially that particular airplane? From a fuel standpoint, the plane couldn't have just stayed in the air that long, correct?
The fuel part's actually fine. It actually had a lot of fuel on it. So that's the thing. They claim the plane flew for another 5.5 hours into the South Indian Ocean after the plane disappeared in those videos. So the fuel part's actually not a problem.
Who's the they on that?
So yeah, the they is because, again, the officials just say they don't know what happened.
Right.
But the Inmarsat pings, these Inmarsat pings were not revealed until at least several days after the plane disappeared. And before Obama actually even spoke about the plane disappearing, which I think is odd as hell. And these Inmarsat pings, they claim like, oh, well, hey guys, the person in the plane turned the computer back on after they were lost from radar. And it turns out that sent some pings, and the pings don't actually say, like, there's no coordinate data. The pings are just like the time between the satellite in the sky and the plane. It's just like this number. And they claim this number is how long it took for this signal to hit the plane. And they say, oh, great. We'll use that to use like Doppler and figure out where the plane was. But weirdly, they have these satellites, Inmarsat does, all throughout the world, all around the world in geostationary orbit. So they cover like the whole planet. And the plane was actually between two of them. It was actually between two of them. The Inmarsat pings never pinged the second satellite that this plane was in range of, ever, on the whole flight. And it's really weird because we looked up the previous flight, like the reverse direction of the flight. It pings it the whole time. It goes back and forth between both of them. And why is this significant? Because if we had pings from two satellites, you could triangulate the exact location of the plane using this methodology, the exact location. But for some reason, we didn't have one of them. So instead, what we had to do was, it's like we only had half the data for some reason, for some weird coincidental reason. Instead, they had to make these arcs. They're like, we don't know exactly where it is, but it's somewhere along this arc here, which is this huge arc. But if we had another satellite, you'd be like, okay, it's either this arc or this arc. And oh, they intersect right here at this point. This is where the plane must have been at that point. And the reason why we don't have that data is because the satellite pings are fake. They're fake. They're spoofed. I don't know what they did to them, but they can't be real. And it shouldn't really, what I'm saying now shouldn't be a stretch. It really shouldn't, because we searched for 11 years in the South Indian Ocean. I think your lead into this was that we just finished searching. They were searching again. They found nothing again. 3 searches, 11 years, and they never found anything down there. And people are still like adamantly come at me like, you're going to look so silly when they find the plane down there. I'm starting to think, are you the people living in a bizarro world? I don't know how you can confidently come at me when there's been 0 results over 11 years. It's obvious the plane never crashed in the South Indian Ocean. It's obvious that was just some cover story they came up with. I mean, just people are like, but they found debris. This is like the most NPC argument I hear from people. They found debris. And I go, have you looked at where they found the debris?
Like, yeah, you and I talked about that with the ocean currents. With the debris being found west of there, I looked at the ocean currents too. You'd sent me that asset, and first thing I asked you was, has anyone done the math to figure out how those ocean currents, if they're moving in a circular motion towards the South Pole, and how long would that have taken? Has anybody done the math on that?
Yeah. I remember Florence Changi, I think, mentioned this on the Reality Check podcast like a year ago. And she said it was something like, I want to say it was like 8 kilometers per day, like in a straight line against the currents to the west from the supposed 7th arc, which is, as I explained in those pings, where they think the plane went down. So it's just basically completely physically impossible. Absolutely 100% physically impossible. They even did, there was a drift analysis that was done before random people started finding the debris. Anyone can go look at it. It's hilarious because there's this article headline that says debris was found exactly where they thought it was. And then there's an image of it. And in the image, you can see the legend at the top, the key. And it's got these squiggly lines that indicate how long it would have taken for debris to drift a certain range. And none of those squiggly lines reach Africa. None of them do. And the oldest squiggly line goes out 2 years. So what that map says is that even after 2 years, no debris would have made it to Africa. Okay. So then why did we find like 20 pieces of debris in Africa just over 1 year? Because your drift analysis says nothing would have made it in 2 years, and we're finding all this debris in just over 1 year, all of it in Africa. And the same drift debris analysis shows, like you correctly said, that if this plane crashed below a certain whatever longitude, latitude, whatever it is, that it's going to go to the east towards Australia and then go up the coast of Australia and then curve back around to the west. But that would mean the bulk of the debris would have washed ashore on Western Australia because it wouldn't have curved back around. It would have just washed ashore right there. How much debris did we find in Australia? Anywhere in Australia? Zero, ever, never, not even one piece. So again, this, like, I actually am a business major and I do stats and analytics. If you were to do basic statistics on the debris drift, you would have found the vast bulk, like 90 to 95% of the debris would have washed ashore on Western Australia. And maybe one or two tiny pieces wash ashore in Africa years later, right? Instead, what happened was we found nothing in Australia, and we found 20 pieces, only 3 have been confirmed. But like 20 pieces, including one piece, an engine cowling with a big RR for Rolls-Royce, clearly from a Boeing 777. These are like a giant kind of like edge piece of the engine. Found in South Africa. South Africa? You know how far away that is? So to think that we found some piece, and then imagine like just a piece of paper, right? An engine cowling. It's just like the edge of an engine. This thing's not sticking out of the water in some magical way where it's gonna, the wind's gonna blow it or anything. It would just have been sitting on the surface of the water, So it's actually wild. Go ahead.
I have to ask based on that then. Okay, if the whole thing is an operation, if it's a psyop or whatever you want to call it, then why wouldn't those people, whoever, if that's planted evidence, why wouldn't they just plant it in Australia where people would assume it would wash up? Why is it in Africa? And if so, who put it there and why would you put it in Africa?
Smart. It's not planted. It's the only conclusion, right? If you were going to first of all, why plant debris at all? If you're disappearing a plane, I'm not going to plant any debris. If I'm going to murder somebody, I'm not going to plant body parts. What are you talking about? Why would I do that? It's just evidence.
You don't think that would be just for them to prove that it did in fact crash? Oh, here's pieces of it.
Could be, but I wouldn't do that at all either. I think that debris fell off the plane. Like, remember, this plane was on fire. So structural integrity of this plane, highly questionable. And then we're seeing it get zapped into a wormhole. So really highly questionable after that, right? A lot of people are like, I don't think the plane's going to survive that. So this plane comes out somewhere on the other side. This plane could have been falling apart. And so wherever it's flying, there could be these tiny pieces that came off of it. Like, for example, people say, well, they found a 7-foot flap from the plane. Well, each wing is 100 feet long. Planes can fly and land without a flap. I Googled it just to make sure. So it could be that, but it also could be this. So if you do believe that, they wanted to have something get found, well, if this plane ended up at Diego Garcia, and they've got some underground hangar or something there, right, when they take the plane down there in the middle of the night or in the early morning hours, I imagine they're not going to keep it. They're going to disassemble the plane. So maybe they disassembled it, and some of those pieces ended up in the water. Now, the crazy part is you look at that drift analysis, that same exact image out there, and go look at where Diego Garcia is and put a point on there where Diego Garcia is. Where all that debris wash ashore is way more consistent with it going in the water at Diego Garcia than the supposed crash site. In fact, it explains how it was found and the time period it was found, like, really accurately.
If the debris fell off of the airplane, the airliner, if it fell off of it, it would have had to have fallen off after the transportation or teleportation, simply because there's no sign of it in the video leading up to when the orbs arrive. So if that's the case, do you think it wound up at Diego Garcia? Because if it did, then why would it have been over near enough Africa where those parts would it have been twice that it teleported?
No, I think that, and yeah, those parts are too far away to come from the Nicobar Islands as well. If it happened in the Nicobar Islands, it's going to get found somewhere over there, right? It's not going to get found way over in, near Africa. So no, I think that they teleported there, and then somehow they either those pieces fell off the plane, which explains how they got in the water and how they got found, and people just didn't even know, and they couldn't do anything about it. And this is, again, kind of goes to the point where some people think the plane was shot down. That's almost the most absurd. There is no hiding the debris field of a plane you shot out of the sky. Right. There's going to be debris everywhere, right? And the reason why we found this debris, in my opinion, is that they couldn't cover it up. They didn't know it was in the water. How are you going to go find a random tiny piece of debris in the water?
Wasn't the claim that the Russians shot it down or something like that? I think I'd heard that.
Yeah, there's a lot of claims. Or the Russians stole it and they flew it, or and then there's also the claim that they turned it into MH370. That the reason why that theory, the conspiracy theory, doesn't work is that you can't land a commercial aircraft on a commercial airport without people knowing. So, and this is part of the reason why this plane had to have landed at Diego Garcia. Like, where else, anywhere in the world, do people think this plane landed? Like, that's the biggest problem. Diego Garcia is the only place that makes sense. It's the middle of nowhere. There is no radar around. It's just the United States military. You can't land commercial aircrafts there. And we found out, just to add more weird stuff on top of this, there was no departures out of Diego Garcia for 72 hours after March 8th. We found this like Facebook thing from way back then. And turns out in June, I think it was June of that same year, so just a couple months later, there was mysterious water damage that destroyed all the old flight logs. Like, oh, wow. What a convenient thing to happen a couple months later, right? And at the time, people were, skeptical about this idea that, like, could we hold people there? But it turns out it's a CIA, Diego Garcia is a CIA black site. In fact, Diego Garcia is in the news a lot now, because apparently Iran was going to attack it. I think we did have, like, orb technology out there that we were probably testing. Perfect place to test it. Way better than Area 51, by the way. Why would I want to test an Area 51 where people are around? Everybody's got eyes on it. No, I'm going to go test this shit in the middle of the Pacific Ocean where nobody's around anywhere. That's where I would go test it. But now that there's been so much heat on Diego Garcia, my guess would be that they've moved it to another super secret base.
So based on your connection with Diego Garcia, I think we've kind of identified who you think the who is, right? The American government, correct?
Yeah. I definitely implicate that. I mean, I would go so far as I think that President Obama knew about this. I think he helped cover it up. I think the reason why Obama didn't speak publicly about MH370 until 10 days later, March 19th, first time he speaks about MH370, even though there's 4 Americans on board. How weird is that? This was well after they had developed this cover story of the plane going to the South Indian Ocean. And then the only other time he spoke about it again was a month later when he was in Malaysia doing damage control with the Malaysian Prime Minister. And he never spoke about MH370 publicly ever again. Wow. John Brennan, James Clapper, these guys were director of, CIA, national intelligence, things like that. They know 100%. Avril Hines, who was just DNI, she was the one who was justifying the drone strikes of like innocent people under Obama, or Americans in like Iraq or Syria or whatever under Obama. She knows too. The amount of people that know sickens me on how many people know about this. Not to mention the people that are like building this stuff behind the scenes that aren't talking about it because they're afraid they're going to get silenced or disappeared. A lot of people know, and the Malaysian government knows. Other governments probably know. Like, the sad part is this is a real cover-up, and it includes people at high level, but there's a lot of people who don't know. A lot of people who don't know, who are just trying to get answers, who are really doing the best they can with the limited information.
Well, you brought me to our why. So tell me why now. We've got the what, the how, the who, but why now? Why would this have been done like this? Why this specific airplane? And I think we touched on it with the semiconductor experts on there. Tell me why.
To sum it up, who's your daddy? Who's your daddy? Imagine you've discovered, reverse engineered, whatever, some technology that is infinitely more powerful than nukes. Infinitely more powerful. So put the Manhattan Project is now to shame. And you've learned from the Manhattan Project too many leaks. So you are going to compartmentalize this and make it secret, the highest levels of secrecy. Perhaps use the Atomic Secrecy Act, 1954. And it's born, anything around it is born secret. What would you do as a nation to ensure that only your nation knows and has this level of technology that's so powerful that it could destroy the entire planet in an instant if you were so inclined? I think you would do anything to maintain that level of technological superiority. And I think you would justify, in the interest of national defense and security, just about any horrific act. So I think that what we were doing here was that we were tired of China trying to steal our technology, trying to steal this technology. And we sent them a message, or we were trying to send them a message, which is that we have like God level technology. Because imagine you're like Vladimir Putin, for example, and then this whole situation happens. How are you going to feel every single time you get on an airplane? Every time you get on an airplane, you know that the United States government has a weapon that you have no capability of stopping whatsoever. And they could disappear your airplane, and not just disappear your airplane, but they're going to have the whole media say that, your pilot had a heart attack. Your pilot had a heart attack and he just crashed the plane, and everybody's going to believe it. Everyone's going to believe it. You'd be extremely scared. That would be a very, very, very powerful message.
And I understand what you're saying. It's basically a flex by the U.S. government. And I mean, I kind of understand the nuances of how intelligence works and why you do things a certain way to send the right message in the right frame. But, and again, understand I'm playing devil's advocate. If we were trying to flex to other countries, is it because a potential leak always seems to mean more than, well, let's take the leak, the Houthi rebel thing that came out with the Signal app and all that. My theory was that this was done on purpose to appear to be a leak so it could show people, we can do this stuff to you, and we plan to do this stuff, and then we actually follow through with it. Whereas if Trump goes on TV and says, hey, we're going to bomb the Houthis, it doesn't carry near as much weight than you thinking that it was a leak and you got a hold of some information that you weren't supposed to ever see. You're probably going to take it more serious because you're like, oh crap, we just stumbled across this. Is this, in your opinion, a way that we send a stronger message that it's kind of leaked out, that Russia, China, whoever else finds out about it? Because if not, why wouldn't you just do this massive, unbelievable worldwide event where you take a remote controlled drone or whatever, and then you show that you have this technology so these other countries see that you have it?
They don't want to do it that overtly because they don't want them to know how to do it. So this is the nuance is, yes, you want to send a message. You only want that message to go to the foreign powers, not to the public. And you want them to know that you did something special, but you don't want to know how you did it, like a magician. You want to see the magician's trick, but you don't want them to know how they did it. So they wanted China to know, and China knew. How do I know China knew? China hacked the Malaysian government the next day. China already suspected state-sponsored espionage was involved. They hacked the Malaysian government, stole classified information about the plane the next day, using a sophisticated hack as well. Why would they even do that? Because they knew there was some sketchy shit going down. The next thing they did was 4 or 5 days after the plane disappeared, they leaked their satellite imagery on the internet, which they've never done ever before or since. And it got reported on as a debris field. But if you look at the images, it's pretty damn clear that they were looking at what happened with the orbs spinning around the plane. They leaked, but those images are very low resolution. So they probably saw generally what happened, but I don't know how it went down. The MH370 videos, they're the Rosetta Stone. I was able to reverse engineer what's going on in those videos. And I still am to this day, reverse engineering, learning more and more every day. And I'm just a random guy that worked in healthcare IT. What do you think China and Russia did when they saw those lit videos leak on the internet 10 years ago? You think they didn't reverse engineer that? Oh, they definitely did. I would go so far as to argue part of the reason why we might be getting more and more disclosure now at a more and more rapid pace is because we already know China and Russia are already figuring it out. And at some point, they're going to catch up. And at some point, everybody's going to have that level of technology. And what does the world look like when various warring factions have God-level technology that's either teleportation or the ability to annihilate the entire planet? And a lot of people will be like, oh, well, don't nukes already do this? People can shoot like 100 nukes at once, and we already have the capability to shoot them down all simultaneously right now because of how advanced AI is. This technology is the type of technology where one person can just press a button, and then that's it. There's no stopping it. Now the planet is going to get zapped, and basically a black hole is going to form, and we're all going to be annihilated instantly, maybe even the whole solar system. Because the problem with this technology is, like you pointed out before, it has the capability to produce energy levels that we thought were impossible before. Energy levels that we thought were complete. In fact, there's maybe no limit to the energy levels it can produce. And this is where, if you were a military, if you were a head of state, and you have your science advisor come and tell you this, if you have Richard Feynman of the Manhattan Project come and tell you this, I can imagine the answer is simple. You keep this secret forever. You keep this secret for as long as we can possibly keep it secret. Just keep kicking the can down the road. Tell people about aliens. Tell people about psychic powers. Just never tell people about what the power source is for something that's defying gravity and floating around, that, you know, define what we would think of as our laws of physics.
With something as, I guess, groundbreaking as what we're discussing here, obviously there's no how-to guide. You don't YouTube it, right? So whoever is manufacturing it, designing it, creating it, whatever, wouldn't there have to be, before you refine it to the point where, if I'm following what you're saying, and this is all true,
yeah,
at the point where they use it with MH370, it was obviously refined at that point, or somewhat refined, because obviously it looks like it was successfully used if that's what they were trying to do. Do you think, knowing what that type of technology can do, have you seen anything prior to 2014 that you feel like was a, quote, testing ground that was like a, oops, yeah, that's not going to work like that, we need to do it like this? You follow what I'm saying? It had to have been tested. Yeah. Surely that wasn't the first time this would have been, quote, tested with MH370, correct?
It's hard to say. A lot of people ask me that, and I try not to like connect too much stuff and go, you know, I call it hitting on 19. I'm not trying to solve every missing thing that's ever happened out there, but what I will say is there's one case that sticks out like a sore thumb. The Philadelphia experiment, 1943. This is before we dropped the atomic bomb. And the reason why this case sticks out is that if you look back, this is like probably the first time ever where it was ever argued that something teleported. And not just something, but a whole battle cruiser. And there's a pretty detailed explanation in terms of how. Very powerful degaussers, things that can produce extremely powerful electromagnetic fields, were specifically built into a new destroyer to try to shield them from radar. Well, interesting, you look into this science and you realize that this exact thing they were trying to do could, in theory, produce gravitational ripples or waves, which is like bending space-time, which is the precursor towards a wormhole. So, and if you look at the people who are involved in the Philadelphia experiment, it is like the top scientists ever. Like Tesla said, no thanks. Thomas Townsend Brown was supposedly connected to it. Einstein was connected to it. What if they accidentally figured out like the Schwinger limit? What if they accidentally figured out, oops, we put too much. We built super powerful electromagnetic fields. Didn't know there might be a limit. And then we turned it on.
Right.
And we didn't realize, oops, we hit the limit. We hit the speed limit. Boom. We just broke through reality. Right. So, man, imagine they figured it out back then. And interesting, that coincides pretty well with the lore and the history of the UFO topic. I mean, I know it goes back much further, paintings, but the 40s are when they claim that stuff started to happen. And then sure enough, end of the 40s, end of the Manhattan Project, that's when we start getting the Invention Secrecy Act of 1951. So that if you make a free energy device, oops, government comes in and says, you can't do anything about that. We steal that. The Atomic Secrecy Act comes in and says that if anything we decide is related to nuclear physics, it's born secret. Means we don't even have to classify it. If we just decide that it's too secret, it's classified. So now everything related to 0-point energy, this idea that space isn't empty, you can just say that's all classified. And then lastly, 1970, 1971 in that range, the Mansfield Amendment. People were upset that the military was spending money on technology and science that didn't necessarily have direct military applications. This is kind of like USAID. People were saying that we're spending money on stuff we shouldn't be spending money on as military. Mm-hmm. So what did this do? It took all the gravity research, the stuff that doesn't have direct military applications, and it pushed it to the defense contractors. So now the defense contractors have all the gravity research, and you can't FOIA the defense contractors. Now the government, if anybody says, hey, do you have any crazy gravity research or UFO stuff, they can just say, no, we don't have it, because they don't. Lockheed Martin has it. Northrop Grumman has it. Boeing has it. Raytheon has it.
Based on what you're describing, I'm curious, how far back does experiments and studies with quantum energy go?
The final boss of 0-point energy is Hal Puthoff. Now, it goes much further back beyond him, of course, but he's the one that started to make it mainstream. He's the one that Robert Forward, who was a guy that was researching the Casimir effect, which is like the proof that there is this 0-point energy. You just put two plates next to each other, really, really close, and they come together. And the only reason why, if it was empty space, they're not going to come together. It means there's something here in between these plates, and there's something on the outside, and there's some kind of weird pressure pulling them together. Robert Forward said Hal Puthoff is the guy that started this all by saying that gravity is a pressure effect from 0-point energy. So if you have more 0-point energy over here and less 0-point energy over here, you're going to get a flow from here to here. And that's
how far back does that go?
1987 is when Hal Puthoff started writing papers about 0-point energy. And the first one he wrote was called The Ground State of a Hydrogen Atom. And he realized something really ingenious, is that if space is not empty, if there's this energy all around us, then every atom might be exchanging energy with that field all the time. And this might explain why these atoms are stable, why the electron, in theory, spins around the nucleus and never shoots out and never collapses into the nucleus. How is it stable? Because it's constantly exchanging energy. And this idea is beautiful because it opens the door to a trampoline-like effect where we can pull energy out of the vacuum, out of the 0-point energy field, and it'll instantly come back. It'll instantly reset itself. If that's real, we can do that. That's free energy. We can pull that energy out, and then the ocean is just going to fill back in right away. Just like if I were to pull water out of the ocean. It's not like I'm never going to drain that ocean, right? Because it's just that big, especially now with a teaspoon. That's the same concept that Hal Puthoff figured out. And he figured out the basis all the way back in the 80s. And he's been writing papers about it ever since. He's the final boss.
Well, I can tell you, Ashton, this is all very fascinating to me. And I can't wait. I'm probably going to break this interview up into a few segments just so I'll put the entire thing out at some point, but I'll probably break it up just to make it easier for people to digest, because I know a lot of my viewers are not going to want to sit through, what are we on, an hour and a half so far? Sure. But I would encourage you to reach out to me if you see anything else. I'd love to report on this. I know that what's going to happen is, with me putting this out, other people are going to reach out to me. I would love at some point, not for the sake of argument, but for the sake of having the discussion, of anyone who has a directly opposing view of yours, possibly get the two of you guys on. And I'm have no problem being a moderator, but to have an honest conversation about this, because I don't feel like taking one side is ever a good idea, especially since some of this stuff is well over my head. I don't pretend to be the guy that understands everything that either you've shared or anybody else, but at the same time, I have a remedial amount of intelligence to understand that it's fascinating. So let me just leave it at that. I got to say this. I certainly appreciate you coming on here. I know that, just based on what you and I have had side conversations on, that you've taken some heat from some people. And we talked about this earlier, that there's this weird little subculture of people out there regarding MH370 that I did not know existed until I reached out to you. And then they heard that you were going to be coming on here. Then they reached out to me. So yeah, it's just this weird little dynamic that I didn't know even was there. But I guess it intrigued me even more. I'm like, well, yep, now I've definitely got to talk to Ashton, because now I really want to see what happens. So hopefully I can pull some of those attractors out of the woodwork and see what they have to say. I just want to make it very clear again, from my standpoint, that I don't have an angle on any of this. I'm just curious. I'm a very curious person. And when I see something that doesn't make sense, especially when it appears to be a cover up. And the biggest thing for me, honestly, in all of this that gives me, I guess, some kind of a feeling that you have to at least somewhere be onto something, is the fact that people have avoided talking about, I'm talking about public officials and people who should know. Like, if the guy watching the radar that night, if I can't talk to him, or if he won't talk to me, there's a reason. And whenever somebody won't tell me what happened, that tells me something happened that I'm probably not supposed to know about. So that's why I'm intrigued about this more than anything, because nobody will talk about this.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've challenged really everybody to a debate. I've challenged MH370 OG investigators, physicists that want to kind of challenge it. And I think that shows a lot, too, that nobody's willing to step up. Also the debunker people, at least the ones I'm not going to debate nameless random people.
Right.
If you're too afraid to put your face on a camera, then that's a non-starter.
100%.
But yeah, nobody has ever been brave enough to challenge me, including the #1 UFO debunker in the world, a guy named Mick West. He dodged 5 different debates that different podcasters, just like you, tried to set up. And I think it does say a lot that not only are people like afraid, because they're afraid because like they can tell I'm a smart guy and I'm not just some random cuckoo guy, right? And they're afraid of a conversation that's going to make them look silly about the facts. But also how a lot of people like in the UFO community, people that should be interested in this stuff won't touch it.
Right.
In a lot of cases, they just won't bring it up at all. Like they're terrified of it, why? You know, this like all that doesn't make sense. And to your point too, there's a lot of stuff that's verifiable in here. Like, is that a drone video or not? Like I said before, there is no such thing as a fake thermal video. No one's ever made one of those before, ever on the internet. Show me one if you can find one. I couldn't.
Right.
So, you know, you look at some of these details and you're like, this stuff should be obvious. And just to take it one step further, I know we didn't talk about this. I don't want to take it much further, but I found the guy that leaked the videos, Lieutenant Commander Edward C. Lynn. I found the guy, and when I started saying his name publicly, he legally changed his name. Instead of reaching out to me saying, hey, I'm not the guy, you're wrong. Instead of threatening me legally, instead of his lawyer reaching out to me, I've reached out to all of them. None of them will return any phone calls. I found the guy that leaked the videos. So we don't really need to have a debate because it's no point. Like, all we need to do is ask Edward C. Lynn, is this what you went to prison for 6 years over? And just get his answer. Right. And then if he says no, we can have a debate about the videos. If he says yes, we don't need a debate. There you go, right? Like that's what's so crazy about this for me. Is like, guys, I found the guy that leaked the videos. I don't know why we're still having debates about the authenticity of the videos.
And maybe at some point you and I can do a follow-up video on that, because I've watched some of your videos where you talked about him and the things that he's done and how he leaked them and when and what he did. And to me, it's equally fascinating to me, that whole story regarding Lynn. So maybe we'll talk about that at a future time.
Yeah, sounds good. Let's do it in the future, Paul. Thank you.
Well, Ashton, it was a fascinating conversation, man. I appreciate it. I always enjoy a good conversation like that. And my questions are all genuine. I mean, I'm thinking on the fly here. I mean, this is all stuff that I'm like, okay, if I can explain one thing that disproves another thing, that I'm cool with it. But when two things don't align with one another, one of them's right and one of them's wrong, right? So that's why I asked the questions. Again, I respect the fact that you're willing to come on here and talk about this. And again, I encourage people to go check out a lot of the videos that you're involved in. I'll post links to them. Very interesting. A lot more detail than what you and I even talked about today. I think that you've shared a lot of good assets with me that I'll include in this video. But your other videos, I think you put one out recently, didn't you? Like a month or so ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, an evidence review one where I go into deep into the evidence. So you can follow that on my lives, on my YouTube channel.
I encourage people to go watch that one. That was a good. I watched that one over a course of 2 mornings, and that was a really interesting video where I got a lot better understanding of your approach to this project.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, what other way do people can they reach out to you, find you, or follow your stuff?
Yeah, at JustXAshton right there on all social media platforms now. So I live stream 3 times a week on YouTube, Rumble, and on Pilled. At JustXAshton on those. And then you can also find my stuff on X and on TikTok and Instagram as well. So,
okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Ashton, for being on here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you too.
So there you go. MH370, a lot of, I would say, question marks still. I mean, I don't have full answers. I respect Ashton and his approach. And, obviously, the man has put a lot of work into this, so I have to respect that. I don't think he would be going down some crazy ridiculous rabbit hole if he didn't feel like there was something there. I mean, why waste your time? I mean, I'm not that much of a fan of wasting my time. Sometimes I get to a point where I realize there's nothing here and I just stop looking. The bottom line of this story is, and I'm willing to listen to just about anybody talk about this, is the fact that nobody can give us answers. Seat cushions float. There's 269 people on board. I believe I have that number right. So that means there's at least 269 seat cushions that all float. Nobody has found a seat cushion out of 269 seat cushions. Not to mention all the other floating things on this airplane. And all they found is about 20 parts, 20 pieces. I said it in my video yesterday. A frog could be sitting on a rock on an island 500 miles off the coast of Malaysia, lean its leg up and fart. Somebody within seconds in the Pentagon is going to hear that fart and know exactly where it came from. Yet we have a 600,000 pound Boeing 777 that manages to disappear amongst a bunch of overlapping satellites. Not to mention the fact that we have a military base right smack in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and we don't have a clue. I'm being lied to. You're being lied to. The reason why I conduct this interview is because I want to know why we're being lied to, because we're definitely being lied to.